So now we're going to look at the validation unit of the assessment module. So what is validation? It's actually where assessors want to compare and evaluate their procedures, their tools, their own decisions in assessment against the relevant competency standards. And they want to do this to ensure quality and consistency when they're assessing. And there's a little link down here that you can go to. That's the NCVER website, which actually has the NCVER definition of validation. So why do we validate? Well, it's a legal requirement. Under SNR 15, you have to assure quality. But we want to assure quality for our clients anyway, because, you know, we need that good word of mouth to get future business. We want to avoid any grievance issues. We want to make sure that the assessment process is fair, just simply from an integrity point of view and an ethics point of view. So the different ways that you collaborate as an assessor is you can consult with different stakeholders, and one is consulting with industry. So the types of questions you're asking industry specialists are: do the assessment tools that you're designing or using reflect the current industry practice? You'd also ask an industry representative, would you be comfortable employing graduates from my course who have been judged as competent after using these tools? When you're working within your assessment team, you would be checking to make sure that the processes are validated. And you want to make sure the questions that you would be asking would be, you know, do the assessment tools meet the unit requirements? Are they pitched at the right ATQF level? So a Certificate 4 course, are we asking quality questions at a Certificate 4 level? Is it pitched too high or perhaps too simply? Sometimes it's just two assessors. It might be internally or externally. But when two assessors compare or validate, they usually would use the same unit. Okay, so they would look at the assessment methods. You would look at your overall tool, which at Evoke, remember, we call the assessment report. And that tool comprises of all of those components: the assessment plan, the assessment instruments, any of the assessor guidelines, you know, the checklists, the questionnaires, you know, the final results and report and any feedback. So you're looking at the whole kit and caboodle there of all of the assessment documents, and or under the assessment plan, the proposed method. So perhaps that's actually, you know, occurring as a validation before the assessment's taking place. You're also looking at judgments and making sure that for the evidence collected, you would be able to deem the candidate competent. So you would be swapping your assessment tools that you use, so especially when it's through different RTOs, and you're saying, okay, I've gathered these 5 pieces of evidence for this unit. I want you to go through them, please, and go through my assessment instruments and my benchmarks, and let me know whether you think that that candidate would be deemed competent by your own standards. And if there's any discrepancies there, then you can flesh it out. Perhaps look right down to the instrument level and the assessor guidelines. You might be looking at how the assessors are interpreting what the requirements are within the unit, or interpreting what they would consider to be sufficient evidence. You know, was there a strong piece of evidence? Was there just supplementary evidence, and therefore more evidence would be required by particular assessors? And what would happen then is that assessor would fill out their own validation report from their own RTO's file and forms, and report back to the RTO on any changes to the processes or instruments that need to occur in order to, you know, meet that quality benchmark that you know, you and the other assessor are agreeing upon. Another thing you can do is swap video recordings of a candidate's performance and apply your own internal checklists. So, for example, if a candidate was making a presentation, you would take another RTO assessor's video of a candidate and you would watch their video as raw evidence, and you would apply your own checklist tool and see whether you've deemed them competent or not. And at the end of that process, you discuss with that assessor whether they had actually found them competent. And so you're actually checking your checklist tools and your judgments that you're making. Once consensus is reached, that's fine, but if there is a discrepancy, once again, you would discuss and agree upon changes to one or both that need to be made, and fill out your own RTO's validation report, and then it's up to the nominated person within the RTO to implement the changes accordingly and record them. So you can validate with the candidate. This is more in that feedback process, and this can be more informally. Did you feel comfortable with the assessment process? Can you apply this competency in the workplace? And that might be asked more to the client, especially if it was an organisation enrolling the candidate. You can look at other evidence. So if there's been any appeals recently, any grievance complaints about the assessment process, or appeals to be reassessed, you would certainly want to run a validation under that situation. Any complaints about the assessor? And also you would always be looking at your data from your annual learner survey results. Internal validation, you're asking questions like, is the assessment process properly applied? Are each of the assessors within the RTO applying the same process? Is the process clear? They would be asking, does the assessment process contribute to industry, to the RTO's organisational strategy? Is the assessment process the most time and cost-effective option? And this is the major one when you're internally validating. How easy are the assessment instruments to use? How easy is the assessment tool? Are you going to have to fish for 5 or 6 different emails with evidence from candidates, or is everything submitted in a one-job lot? How easy has that administration been for you in gathering, in collecting? How easy have the assessor guidelines been? Have they been easy enough to interpret and apply? So this is the main question when we're internally validating, because we want to look at the efficiency for the assessors in the company. Now, the other thing as well with validation and with legal requirements is when we look at the assessor themselves. Are the assessors meeting the ATQF requirements? So this is stating teacher, but the trainer and assessor, we'll just call the trainer and assessor the teacher for argument's sake right now. Does the teacher demonstrate the vocational competency to at least the level being delivered or assessed? Unless you have a forklift licence, you cannot be assessing forklifts. Unless you have a Certificate 4 in training and assessment, you can't be assessing in Certificate 4 training and assessing. It's no good being a qualified high school teacher, because that's about the K-12 curriculum, or the mid-school and senior school curriculum. So, you need to at least have the level being delivered. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to race out and do a Certificate 3 in coffee making, and that isn't an actual course, but just for argument's sake. You would then have to do a recognised prior learning if you're currently working as a barista, and be able to show enough evidence that you can demonstrate the level of competency at least to the level being assessed. So, for example, if I had a diploma in VET, that is a step above the Certificate 4 in training and assessment. So to train and assess in the Certificate 4, TAE 40110, I wouldn't need to get that Certificate 4 if I had something above that. Okay, that's where it means at least to the level being delivered. How does the teacher demonstrate current industry skills? And this is the main one that you need to be able to maintain. How are you going to demonstrate currency? If you're continually working in that field, then you would be maintaining industry currency. But if you're working at a high school and you're delivering a vet unit, but your full-time job and only job is a high school teacher, you're going to have some issues demonstrating current industry skills. So you'll have to get out there in the workplace and maintain your currency, perhaps a part-time job. That's something that's going to have to be negotiated with the RTO, because ultimately it's the RTO that's going to be audited by ASQA to determine your currency. I would expect that your RTO would need you to keep a diary of your professional development and your actual workplace experience that directly relates to each of the performance criterion of the course that you're delivering. So you can't just know it in theory and just be demonstrating it as a trainer. To maintain current industry skills, you need to be out there in the industry and exposed to that. Perhaps it means some memberships with, with some of the industry bodies. Now, the third thing we look at is the teacher continuing to develop their vet knowledge and skills and their industry currency? So once again, this is where we're looking at what professional development you've been doing throughout a year, and most RTOs will require their trainers and assessors to maintain like a diary or a portfolio of their professional development.